Hello, I'm Tim Wall, Senior Reporter for Pet Food Industry. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Ask the Pet Food Pro, Rethink Minerals, Strengthen Formula Foundations, and Power Pet Health. Ask the Pet Food Pro connects experts with industry professionals and offers the opportunity to pose questions directly. Ask the Pet Food Pro is brought to you by Pet Food Forum and Pet Food Industry's journalists and editors. Drawing on our combined decades of experience covering the dog, cat, and other pet food markets, you can find our reporting and analysis at petfoodindustry.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter and monthly magazine. Today's discussion focuses on trace minerals in pet food. Pet food ingredient producer Zinpro sponsors this edition of Ask the Pet Food Pro. Our expert guest is Dr. Allison Milliken, Global Pet Lead at Zinpro. And welcome, Dr. Milliken, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. And as Tim mentioned, I am Allison Milliken. I currently work within the Zinpro organization to support not only our technical aspects throughout the globe for our sales teams, but also on the strategic development side as well. I do have a background in animal nutrition with a PhD from Texas A&M University and a master's in animal physiology from Clemson. And my journey in the pet space has been exciting, but I have been with Zinpro since 2022, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about minerals today.
Great, thank you. We're looking forward to it as well. But before we do start that discussion, I have a few little announcements. So audience members, you have all been muted to ensure that everyone can hear and focus on the discussion. I've included many of the questions that you all sent in beforehand in our script, but if you have a question that occurs during the discussion, please submit those or any other comments in the chat box. Please do note that this chat is being recorded, so you can access the recording starting in about a week at petfoodforumevents.com. Click on the Ask the Pet Food Pro tab at the top. All right, Allison, so to get started, let's consider some of the basics of trace minerals. The very name says that they only appear in small quantities, yet they can be vital to animal health. What are some of the key functional benefits that rely on trace minerals from a biological perspective?
Great question. So trace minerals actually serve as cofactors for enzymes, meaning they're going to activate enzyme systems that will regulate a variety of biochemical reactions throughout the body. And essentially what that breaks down to is the fact that they are heavily involved in many of the functional aspects in our pet. So from growth and development, metabolism, immune support, barrier function and health, so think skin, gut, etc., bone and joint health, and then even oxygen transport. So oftentimes when I get this question, I almost pose it back, and it's, what functional benefit doesn't in some way actually rely on trace minerals? Because especially when you look at that collective, their reach within supporting really overall health is extremely large, even though they are needed in such small amounts.
Being used in such small amounts like that seems like it might be easy for some to perhaps, be in too small of an amount. What are some of the trace minerals that are most commonly underutilized in existing pet food formulations?
With our trace minerals, especially the essential ones, we do have minimums that are set by AFCO and CDF. So as far as underutilization in respect to the amounts being added, I don't necessarily feel like that is a gap in the industry. However, I think in the same token, almost all of them, in a sense, are underutilized, but more in the sense of the category as a whole being undervalued and underleveraged. So trace minerals really can be used as a strategic ingredient, even though they are essential and we need them for sure. They can have that added benefits that come into play as well, especially if they're backed by pet-proven research. So really the challenge as an industry that I like to pose, and I guess as a company we're posing, is to really rethink minerals, because most cases are already being added. So it's just recognizing where that opportunity is to potentially elevate your trace mineral program and utilize that to not only provide that foundational nutrition, but deliver scientifically backed functional benefits and really bring just that additional value that hasn't maybe been leveraged in the past to various products or line of products.
Gotcha. So trace minerals, I understand, can come from different sources and be produced in different ways. And this ties into a question that came from the audience beforehand. What are some of the key differences between the organic or inorganic trace mineral sources in a pet's nutrition?
Again, a wonderful question. And oftentimes one where people do start to get a little confused because there's a lot of nuances in trace mineral nutrition, but the biggest difference in the broad categories between inorganic and organic is the fact that an organic trace mineral is bound to a carbon source. So a protein, a carb, amino acid, etc., versus your inorganics are truly inorganic in nature, right? So they're not bound to any source of carbon. Within the inorganics category, you have things like your sulfates and oxides, where there are known or relatively known values around the bioavailability of those distinct mineral sources. Traditionally, it's accepted that sulfates are more bioavailable than oxides. And then you're able to move into that organic category, which would be more bioavailable than your inorganics. However, when you move into the organics category, there actually are there's quite a few differences between different organic minerals. And really what it comes down to is what that mineral is actually bound to. So as I mentioned before, like it could be bound to a protein or a carbohydrate source or a single amino acid. And so the key is that when you're choosing an organic trace mineral, that you want to make sure it has what we consider 5 factors to evaluate. You want it to be water soluble, right? Which is really important because that layer right before or right at the level of the enterocyte is going to have really the pH essentially of water, right? So it's got to be soluble at that level. The product needs to be stable across a range of physiological pHs. So again, what the mineral is bound to may depend on if it dissociates at a certain pH or it stays together throughout the pHs within the GI tract. And then one that's really important is you want it to be stable in the presence of dietary chelating agents. And we may address this later on, but that's often one of the biggest challenges with trace mineral nutrition is there's all these different things that can inhibit the mineral from actually being absorbed. So you want something that can withstand those chelating agents and still be able to be absorbed and utilized by the animal. And then, as I've mentioned throughout, it's got to be absorbable, right? If it's not absorbable from the GI tract, it's not going to make a difference what it is, right? It has to be absorbable for the animal to use it. And then the last one is with that organic, you want to make sure that it is delivering some sort of an increased animal performance benefit, right? To be able to justify that additional cost, you want to be able to see a benefit associated with that mineral.
Gotcha. So you mentioned chelation earlier. Let's circle back a little bit to that and talking about binding the trace minerals to other chemicals and how that can help with improving nutrition and absorption in dogs and cats. Could you tell us a little bit more about how chelation does that and how it benefits the nutrition of cats and dogs?
Absolutely. So the challenge really with inorganics as a whole is they end up as free ions, right? And when a free metal ion is in the GI tract, kind of as I just mentioned, there's a lot of challenges as far as being able to hinder its absorption. So there's mineral to mineral interactions that can negatively impact each other and that absorbability. We also have what are called anti-nutritional factors. So things like phytic acid, even lignin, some of those, they all have binding sites for some of our very key trace minerals. And what happens is they're stronger, that binding is stronger oftentimes than what that affinity would be for the mineral to be absorbed into the enterocyte. And so it traps it and it's no longer able to be utilized by the animal. And so those are probably your biggest challenges when it comes to that absorbability. And then when you chelate something, you create an opportunity to make that mineral more resistant to those challenges. And again, it really depends on what the chelating agent is and whether or not it's staying bound, and then also how is that being absorbed. So oftentimes what the goal would be have a mineral that's bound to a specific ligand that can navigate all the different pHs, stay together, but still be absorbable, right? Because there are certain ligands that are out there that it binds really well, but it may not be able to be utilized by the animal. So again, that really comes into play why we again have those 5 factors. So it's got to be water soluble, it's got to be stable across those pHs, stable in the presence of the chelating agents, able to be absorbed, and then lastly, again, show that benefit to the animal. So you really know that animal is getting its necessary nutrition to support overall health and well-being.
And so speaking of some of those benefits, let's go into a little bit more detail on some of those. And so what role do trace minerals play in some specific things like skin, coat, immune system, joint health, and the outcomes in pets?
Absolutely. So it's actually, I find it fascinating and interesting, but some of the roles that these different minerals play support multiple of these functional benefits. For example, so structural protein synthesis heavily relies on zinc. So thinking about skin and coat, again, the intestinal lining, all those things are going to need zinc to help maintain the integrity of it. We also have connective tissue formation, right? So have needed in bone and joint health and skin and coat health, all of those things. Copper and manganese are heavily involved in that. So thinking collagen production and also joint sulfate production, those things require those minerals to be able to be produced in the body. Combating oxidative stress. So thinking about the immune system, right? Manganese, zinc, copper, iron, selenium, they're all involved in some way in the immune system and combating oxidative stress. So really supporting immune health as a whole. And also even those, like for example, skin and coat, right? Oftentimes some of the challenges we have with skin and coats could actually be tied back to an oxidative stress issue that needs to be managed. You also have, you think about hemoglobin production, right? So oxygen transport is fully dependent on iron. And then even things as we don't always think about, like coloration of our animals, of the hair, different trace elements are also involved in that as well. So this is not an exhaustive list, but it's ways we can start thinking about how these specific minerals do really support these different functions. And then when you collectively put them together, you're really able to support that overall health and well-being because so many of them are involved in supporting so many different of these functions.
This is a very complex interplay of all these different trace minerals and their impact on the pet's bodies. How are these levels determined? Like, how do you determine the recommended feeding rates of these trace minerals?
Absolutely. I mentioned ASCO and PDF, so there is some data out there, excuse me, around what those levels should be. Most of that data that supports those levels was done, I would say, in other species predominantly. We have, as an industry in the past, leaned very heavily on other species data to help set these minimum nutrient requirements. For us specifically, we have set recommendations that we recommend for our products based on that concentration of mineral being added to the diet. They're relatively in line with what you would see with AFCO or CDF, with the exception of for copper and iron, we have a lower recommendation than that minimum. And so for transparency, we recommend 100 parts per million zinc, 25 parts per million manganese, 7 parts per million copper, and 45 parts per million iron. And that's coming from that additive source of minerals, so not your raw ingredients. And again, these levels for us are based on really all the research that we've done for the last 54 years, not only in pets, but also in other species. And where that's really apparent for us is that manganese aspect. And so, funny, it ties back to a question we answered earlier. I do feel like manganese actually is underutilized to a degree in pet food. It's an unsung hero that I think has just a lot of benefits that we don't always acknowledge. So our manganese recommendation is a little bit higher than what you would see with that AFCO men for both dogs and cats. And then with copper specifically, right, we know that there can be challenges with copper. So if you're guaranteeing that animal is getting a portion of that copper, for sure, you can have confidence in those levels and also know that you're going to have flexibility with what's coming in from your raw ingredients. And it's similar for iron. But really, at the end of the day, we have a huge opportunity to better understand where our true requirements are for trace minerals. And that is a lot of even the research that we've done up until this point. We want to help the industry understand that because there's very little data. So at this point, these levels really are based on what research is out there and then what we've learned from other species.
Gotcha. So you mentioned copper levels earlier, and an audience member actually submitted a question related to copper before the show. In June last year, the Association of American Feed Control Officials Pet Food Committee voted not to establish a voluntary controlled copper claim for dog food. Research and discussion of a possible claim had been ongoing since a February 2021 article published in the Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association had expressed concern over the current AFCO nutritional guidelines for copper in dog foods. What are your thoughts on this copper conundrum?
Yes, so we actually were involved with those conversations. We had an expert on the panel that did the review of that. And one thing that came of that actually was that we published a journal article called Copper Metabolism and its Implications for Canine Nutrition in Translational Animal Science in 2024. And this paper really outlines not necessarily our position, but just our opportunity to better understand copper metabolism as a whole in the industry. And I do think that's a very critical piece, right? I just mentioned we don't have a lot of data. And so there's a huge gap in what we know and understand about specific copper metabolism in pets. But we do know there's certain breeds of pets that do have more challenges than others. And so the question comes back to, you put a maximum knowing that it may not impact all breeds, or do we just have this opportunity to continue to investigate this and learn more to be able to better assess whether or not that max would be needed, and if so, what it would look like in the future. So from our perspective, there's a lot of challenges with this, even from a research perspective. We're very limited as an industry to what type of research we can do in pets. So I would love to hear back from the industry. Are there other species that we would be open to exploring further in to help us identify proper biochemical markers to better assess copper status? Because right now we don't have one, and without doing super invasive studies, it's really hard to understand what's actually happening. And the other challenge I would say is a lot of that data that came forward to get this conversation started, it came from deceased animals, and they may have had elevated copper levels, but we don't necessarily know if that's what caused them to pass. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to remember correlation doesn't always mean causation. So we've got to find a good way to answer that correlation question. It could be, and it could be what's happening. It could not. But until we understand more within that space, it's very hard to make a true assessment onto where those max levels would be. Now, with that being said, I think it is vital as an industry that we understand what our copper levels are in our foods that are being produced, right? As I mentioned, we do have copper coming in from raw ingredients. So being very aware of the raw ingredients you're using, what those copper levels are, and then how they interplay. So again, our recommendation is only supplement 50% of that requirement and rely on your raw ingredients to supply the rest of it, because we know there's a lot of challenges with the availability of copper in raw ingredients, and we're still even understanding the difference between a protein source versus our carbohydrate source. There was actually a poster at Animal Science a month ago, looking at that, and it was the availability of copper in different ingredients. And so that's another space we have a lot of opportunity to better understand and complete that holistic picture.
Gotcha. Thanks for giving us your 2 cents about copper. And overall, you've given us a very solid foundation in trace minerals to work from. So now let's talk a little bit more about how that biology translates into day-to-day manufacturing and regulatory compliance. We'll bring it back to AFCO again. An audience member had asked about this before the show. How can a targeted trace mineral strategy help you comply with AFCO in the US and FEDIAF in Europe nutritional profiles while adding functional value?
Yeah, so the right mineral strategy, I believe, can help you formulate with confidence. So by providing a source that you are strongly confident in knowing that the animal will be able to utilize it and that it supports the minimum requirements that animal needs to be able to be healthy. And that's, again, where you can take that approach. Let's supply X amount of this mineral that we know there's data to support, and then be able to have that flexibility with your other raw ingredients to bring in potentially additional mineral, but you're not relying on it to support that nutrient minimum. But at the same time, you have enough space to be able to not have those levels being overly high. And that's specifically important with copper, with iron, and then in general with CDF, right? It's a little more challenging because of the way they have specific maximums on a multitude of their nutrients. And so it really is. It's about being confident in your additive and ensuring that those animals are getting that necessary amount and not necessarily more than what they need, right? Because they're trace minerals for a reason. More is not better. So the right amount is what is key to be able to deliver, support the health functions, and then have all the other ingredients and technologies within the pet industry to continue to elevate that formula. So if you've got the right foundational nutrition, you can really elevate that performance of your whole formula while also having that confidence and potential flexibility.
Gotcha. So from that formulation standpoint, what are some of the measurable impacts of using a high quality, advanced trace mineral sources on pet health and wellness and an optimization of a formula?
Yeah, so at this point, our research has shown that you can see measurable benefits in skin and coat, mobility, metabolic efficiency, and vitality, and even senior support. The opportunity to have something that is research backed is really what brings that functional aspect and formula optimization, right? Again, you're delivering a strong foundation of nutrition that can also bring in these functional benefits. And again, the challenge we have in the pet food space is that there is very little trace mineral data out there. So anytime you have the opportunity to work with a partner that has the research and has that continued interest into better understanding how we can leverage these potential ingredients in the brand story, while also adding to our scientific knowledge as a whole to understand how we can best utilize these minerals to optimize pet health and wellness, and also make your formulas perform at its best by having that strong foundational nutrition.
Gotcha. And from that strong foundation, there can be different qualities or sources of minerals, of trace minerals. What are some of the real differences between what might be perhaps a lower cost choice of trace mineral versus a high quality? Are there really differences between them? And how does that play out?
Yes, so differences do exist. And I know I touched on this a little bit briefly, but again, with your inorganics, there's a lot of challenges that can be associated with getting that mineral absorbed, right? They're impacted by chelating agents, the mineral to mineral interaction, all of those aspects, including even our natural feedback loops, right? The way our body controls the absorption of different nutrients, that can also negatively impact the absorbability of certain trace minerals. And so that inorganic space, we have that inherent knowledge that those challenges exist. You move into the organic space, and again, I mentioned there are differences really between what those minerals are bound to. For example, if you have a organic trace mineral that is going to disassociate prior to it getting to that enterocyte, then that metal is now a free ion and could face some of the same challenges that maybe your inorganic would face. So just understanding how the different organics navigate the GI system, how they're absorbed, and then also that absorption pathway itself. So some organic trace minerals may use like a di and tripeptide absorption pathways. Some may use that and the traditional inorganic pathway. Or maybe you have a specific amino acid complex, and that would be leveraging specific amino acid transporters. And then when you start looking within the amino acids, different amino acids have different affinities, right? For example, really with all of us, mammals, our pets, us, we have basically a higher affinity for essential amino acids that are absolutely necessary in these different building blocks. Looking at where that affinity is and that absorbability aspect on that chart can even play into what you're choosing in that space. So some amino acids, they're pretty low priority. Maybe they're not essential, but in general, there's various biological reasons that they're not a high priority, whereas something like a lysine, for example, it tends to be a much higher priority because in most species, it's the first limiting amino acid. So it really comes down to understanding what that mineral is bound to and how it's going to react throughout the GI system. And then again, asking that question, are you actually seeing a benefit from making that change? And that's where the potential to have a research-backed benefit or research-proven products can really help elevate the story and bring value. Again, that does come potentially with a cost, but there's ways you can leverage that ingredient that you maybe wouldn't have been able to in the past.
So before we delve into that a little bit more, the story that you can tell with your trace minerals, let's switch gears a little bit and answer a question that we got from the audience before the show. We had a question about, are minerals ever added to animal feeds as processing aids for the actual making of the food, such as a flow agent or something along those lines?
So when speaking specifically to really your essential trace minerals, so right, your zinc, copper, manganese, iron, iodine, selenium, you're not going to see those being added as any type of a processing aid, because what we know, again, is there is a ceiling on these, right? They are needed. They're needed in a very specific amount. So if, for example, there may be things, I know in other species where they've used some of these, but in those scenarios, they are bound to something that makes it completely unavailable to the animal. So that's the important piece. If something's being added as sort of a processing or flow agent, and it's one of these, you have to ensure that it is not available to the animal and that you're focusing on the amounts that are available to the animal. So that's, again, it's because it's an essential nutrient and it's a trace essential nutrient, we just always have to be cognizant that they can eventually become toxic. There's a ceiling on every one of these, and for some of these, that ceiling is lower than others, right? Selenium, iodine, those are going to have a lower ceiling than a zinc, right? And so, again, just being very clear about where those elements are coming in And if you do have something like maybe from I have seen it before where a coloring ingredient had a really high amount of iodine. And so there had to be a lot of digging to understand, is that iodine actually available to the animal? Because if you just looked at it on paper, man, there's a lot of iodine, but in reality, how much of that was actually available to the animal? Definitely an important aspect from the industry standpoint that I encourage people to look into and understand just where exactly all your minerals are coming from when you're evaluating total mineral content within a diet.
And don't hit that selenium ceiling.
Yeah, yes. Very important.
Yourself as a scientist understands that, and pet food producers themselves may understand the importance of trace minerals. Pet owners themselves might not be so aware. Here's another one that we received from an audience member before the show. They asked about how trace mineral benefits can be effectively communicated to pet owners by pet food brands.
Yeah, so this is an excellent question. We know that pet trends tend to mimic human trends, right? And historically, minerals have always checked this box, right? We need them. We want to make sure they're in there. They're added. They're not really talked about. But some recent surveys in the human market have actually shown that global consumers are starting to recognize minerals as being essential for daily health. And the survey done by Innova Marketing Insights in 2024 said 58% of these consumers are actively seeking mineral fortification on labels. And so beginning to understand that the broader public is starting to say, hey, minerals are important. And I think COVID really made that even more apparent, right? That understanding of how these foundational nutrition, like our ingredients or micronutrients, are so important to being able to support overall human health. And so really leveraging the fact that consumers are becoming more aware, but also the aspect of scientifically backed, right? That's becoming more and more of a trend in the human space. So if you can partner with someone that there is specific data in pets that can support a various claim that you're working to make, or can add that level of maybe transparency that your consumers are looking for. They want to know where their ingredients came from, have they been researched, etc. So there's a lot of opportunities in that vein to be able to start communicating these benefits. And again, really capitalizing on the fact that consumers are becoming more aware of the importance of minerals for our own health. And we would expect that to follow in what we feed our pets.
Yeah, so following up on that and going a little bit deeper into it, there's a lot of pet foods out there now. It's a very crowded market. How can optimizing trace mineral sources and really promoting that to pet owners, how can that help to differentiate a brand in this crowded market?
Yeah, so again, I think it's a space that we haven't talked about a lot. So it's an opportunity to bring forward something different and a way to differentiate in supporting benefits that we know we need, right? The number of health benefits or functional benefits that our pets are desired for our pets, it's not changing, right? Maybe we get some new ones, but as a whole, like supporting general health, like we know what these spaces are. So to be able to bring something that's maybe not a novel ingredient, but a novel concept into how we can support these different buckets, I think there's a huge opportunity there, right? And it's something we haven't talked about a lot in the past. So it's almost like a little bit of a blank space. But also, when you're utilizing an elevated or advanced trace mineral, not only are you giving yourself that opportunity to maybe support claims with research specifically in that space, but also if you're elevating the foundation of your formula, your overall formula should perform better or at its best, right? And that ultimately creates the opportunity to build brand loyalty, because we know you can get somebody's attention one time, right? They see something flashy on the packaging, but the biggest challenge is getting them to come back and buy your product every time. And in order for that to happen, your product has to perform in a way that they feel like their pet is living their best life, like that their health and wellness is fully supported. And so not only is this supporting specific claims and all of those pieces important, but really focusing on how optimizing your foundation of nutrition with the right ingredients and the right sources can ultimately elevate your whole product as a whole.
Gotcha. Seems like a trace mineral strategy can really add to that perceived value that pet owners and the retailers who are promoting it can see. Do you have anything else that you might elaborate on how a trace mineral formulation or strategy can improve that perceived value, how to communicate that?
Yeah, it's purpose with performance, right? So if you have, again, you're working with someone that you have a trusted partner, that you have this ample amount of research and scientific backing into understanding those products and how they benefit your pet, it gives it additional credibility. You're not just adding this ingredient to have it on the label, right? I think we have a lot of those consumers out there that read the label and they're like, oh, this sounds scary. It's got to be bad, right? But in reality, it's bringing some sort of essential benefit. And I think vitamins fall in that category. Trace minerals often do too. So really bringing that visibility to, hey, like these are added because one, they're necessary, but two, they bring value to all these different benefits that are of interest to you. And they're added for a very specific purpose. And we are using a source that we know is backed by research and from a company that they trust. So when building that credibility in there, I think it's just another opportunity to leverage that story.
Gotcha. And it looks like we're getting some good questions in from the audience. Before we start answering some of those questions, let's take a brief look into the future of trace minerals. Can you give us some hints of what's on the horizon in terms of trace mineral research and innovation for Zinpro or for the ingredient category as a whole?
Yeah, so for us specifically, we are committed to continuing to bring new research to the industry. And it's one, yes, it is to support and better understand how our products or minerals as a whole can support health in our pets. But also, there's so little data out there in trace minerals in pets. So being able to really elevate our knowledge as a scientific community, as an industry around how trace minerals can impact these different health benefits is really important to us. And from a historical standpoint, we've always been very dedicated to research. So we have over 350 peer-reviewed publications. We're actually getting close to 400, I believe. And so it's no matter what species we're working with, that has always been a vital piece. And it's not just about promoting our product, but understanding, again, how these minerals impact animal health and how our products can potentially help with certain health problems or navigate different issues or support specific benefits. So we continue to be dedicated in that space. We did another research project last fall that we're currently wrapping up the data and getting that messaging completed. We have another project we're actually starting this fall and are currently in discussions even on what is the 2026 projects look like. So really always looking to figure out where we can better understand how our products can help these animals. And so as an industry, so beyond just what we're doing, I know I presented at Animal Science, I guess a month ago, and that was one of the things I kept pushing is, we need this data. We need this data. So even beyond our pet food manufacturers, getting that academic involvement and all of these pieces, I think we can elevate the industry as a whole. And this copper example that we brought up, it's a great example. Like, we don't have the research to truly back one decision or another. Like, there's a huge gap. So trying to find a way that we can do that and understand it is going to benefit everyone. So I just think that I hope that it becomes something that we're talking about more and that we're really working to understand more, because we understand so much more than other species. Just really being able to enhance our knowledge within the space is definitely a goal for us as well.
Gotcha. Seems like scientists have covered a lot of ground, but there's still more ground to cover, and maybe some doctoral candidates out there have been listening and will get some ideas for their dissertations. All right. Speaking of covering a lot of ground, we've covered a lot of ground in this discussion, but not everything. We've gotten some questions from the audience, and let's take a look at those now and see what other topics are on the minds of pet food professionals. One question we have is asking about the different strategies for using organic minerals or trace minerals in wet versus dry pet food matrices. There are different types. Is there a difference between wet and dry?
So that's an excellent question. From a, again, nutritional standpoint, right? The nutrient requirements are the same, but we're utilizing different ingredients. So that does come back to really understanding what your raw ingredients are bringing in. And when you're leveraging, so especially with wet pet food, a lot more meats, liver-based products, etc., it's even more important to understand what those trace mineral levels are. And again, what's driving that, right? Is it coming from liver? Is it coming from a potential other meat source or maybe a carbohydrate source? And really breaking down, say, what would the availability of that mineral be? So I do think in some cases there does need to be some changes in the strategy, but at the end of the day, ensuring that minimum requirement is met is still, in my mind, the most important strategy in both spaces. And again, if you're meeting that with something you're very confident in, then you have a little more flexibility with those different raw ingredients. But let's say not everybody's mineral strategy is what our recommendations are, right? So let's say, for example, with iron, like maybe you came in and you want to add 100% of the iron requirement, but you're looking at your whole formula and you're like, man, that iron is really high. So it must be coming in from additional sources. So really breaking that out. Where is it coming from? Okay, do I really need to be adding 100% of iron, or could I reduce that? I think that, again, when you do reduce it, ensuring you have a source that you're very confident in, knowing that requirement will be met at the end of the day is the most important. And then just really, regardless dry or wet, understand where those trace minerals are coming from and then navigate really accordingly.
Gotcha. So that answer actually ties in to one of the other questions that we had. That was asking about if a formulation is using a bound and unavailable mineral as a processing aid, does that ingredient need to be on the label, one? And does that mineral then also get considered in the guaranteed analysis of or printed on the label?
So I feel like that's a regulatory question.
Right.
But I'm happy to offer my 2 cents. The labeling, I do not know. I know there are a variety of rules and aspects around that, so I encourage you to talk to your regulatory specialist in that space. As far as in the total mineral content, again, I from what is being reviewed through regulatory FDA inspections, et cetera, most of the time they are looking at total mineral content, at least from my experience. So I would make sure that you do have an awareness of that. And if you have something really high off the charts, I don't know, maybe there's an alternative source of what's bringing that in that would maybe have less of it. But ultimately, again, that's really a regulatory space. So I wish I could be more help, but regulatory is going to be your best friend in those conversations.
Gotcha. Topic for another Ask the Pet Food Pro.
Yep.
Okay, what are your thoughts on using supplements such as treats, top dressings, toppers, chews, paste, things like that, as a means to get more mineral nutrition into our pets? Is a question we had.
Yeah, so the supplement market and even the treats market in the last, 5 to 6 years, it's been incredible the way it has exploded and the offerings that are out there. Again, I think it more solidifies how we follow human nutrition, right? I always chuckle at my husband. He's got like a new supplement on the bar every day. And I'm like, you really need this? But anyway, we don't get into those conversations. But with our pets, I absolutely think that there are scenarios where it's the right fit. Like, for example, let's use skin and coat support for this particular example. We actually had a dog that was supposed to be on a research project that we were doing with senior dogs. And right before the project, she broke with really bad atopic dermatosis. And so what we decided to do was go ahead and put her on the diet that she was slated for, which was one of our diets. But we recognized that she probably needed more zinc, right? That was one element that we're like, okay, we know the involvement of that. Let's go ahead and boost it. So we added an additional, I believe it was maybe 20. Don't quote me on that, but I'd have to go back and verify. But we added additional zinc to her diet as a supplement. And within 8 weeks, she looks like a different dog. And we didn't include her in our data analysis, but wanted to see like, how can we help? And so I think that's a great example of some dogs, like she was probably constantly navigating some sort of underlying skin challenge, and she got stressed just enough through whatever that it just escalated it. But as a whole, she probably needs more zinc than maybe the other dogs. So I think where supplements are so awesome is that we can really start to target this individualized nutrition. And they're just, dogs are like you and cats, right? They're like humans. We all have a little different requirements, a little different lifestyles. Maybe the products that are on the market don't fit it exactly, but is there an opportunity to utilize a supplement to support that? And I think for trace minerals specifically, there are. So joint supplements, skin and coat supplements, even some of your digestive stuff, there's a lot of them that really could benefit by leveraging the appropriate trace minerals. Now, with that being said, do we want to throw the whole gamut at them again on top of their complete and balanced diet? Maybe not. So again, it's being very strategic and then also educating that end consumer on what that animal needs and making sure that, let's again use copper. It's a great one as an example. If they're getting copper in their diet and they're adding 3 different supplements that also have copper in it, you're maybe running into a problem. So just ensuring that we continue to educate around the utilization of our supplements or the supplements in the market, I think is really important. But yeah, great opportunity to leverage individualized nutrition.
Yeah, something you mentioned there just actually sparked a question for myself that when we're especially speaking about marketing using trace minerals. Some of the trends that are out there, like healthy aging, gut health, skin health, things like that. How can functional trace minerals support a promotional campaign involving those trends?
In my opinion, I feel like the greatest opportunity is, again, to leverage research that has been done supporting those specific trends. There's a lot of opportunity to specifically talk about those benefits. Yes, we may collectively understand how trace minerals support these different functional benefits, but without that specific data, sometimes supporting a whole campaign may be a little more challenging, right? Our end consumer isn't accepting or is less accepting of other species data. So pet data is really the most important if you're going to be pushing, again, in my opinion, into a marketing campaign. You want to have that data in that species to support it and show how it's being effective in whatever benefit that you're looking to promote.
Gotcha. It all comes back to being science-based.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. One last question here before we reach the top of the hour. So when calculating total starting mineral content in dog food to determine the proper trace mineral supplement amount, do you take into account declining nutrient content of feedstocks due to soil degradation? And then maybe that's talking about from the raw materials, perhaps not having the same nutrient levels each time, or how do you determine with your raw materials what their nutrient content is to maintain, or perhaps do you have to worry about the trace minerals degrading over time on the shelf?
To answer the last part first, I don't feel like you really have to worry about that element degrading. It's a lot more stable than like a vitamin, for example. Like you compared vitamin A to zinc, vastly different strategies in approaching the concentrations in the diet over time. So traditionally your trace elements are going to be very stable in the diet, but this question brings up a great point. 100% raw ingredient variability is in really all of our raw ingredients. And soil concentration, so where those ingredients are grown, if they're not a meat-based product, directly impacts the trace mineral concentrations in that plant. So I think, again, this kind of goes back to working with your suppliers. So understand, where are your ingredients coming from? Where are they grown? What testing are they doing? And then also testing your own ingredients. I think I'd love actually for there to be a better database, and maybe it exists and I don't know about it, but a better database for pet food companies to be able to utilize as far as what raw ingredient concentrations look like and how they can vary. But ultimately, I do feel like it's on kind of that pet food manufacturer to really understand, okay, these are the raw ingredients I'm using, have some sort of a testing strategy to really know what trace minerals are coming in and other nutrients as well, so that it can be parted or averaged into the nutrient profiles that are being leveraged within whatever formulation software that you have. Unfortunately, not like testing is really the only way. Actually, at Zenpro, and we haven't pushed as much into this in the pet space yet, but I have been intrigued. Our poultry producers have a lot of challenges with that, so globally especially. And so there's been projects to better understand, okay, what are trace mineral levels in raw ingredients? And they've done some really unique work in the space. And I do hope one day maybe we have the opportunity to do something similar in pets. No guarantees, so no one chase you down afterwards and say, where is that? Because it doesn't exist yet. But I do think there's just a lot of opportunities to better understand. And at the end of the day, without testing, you can't be fully confident into what those levels are from your raw ingredients. So it's definitely a key piece of formulation.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to me is how it even ties into ideas of soil health and sustainability and regenerative agriculture type principles, that it's all connected. But,
Absolutely.
we'll have to have a whole nother show about that topic too.
A discussion for another day.
Yep. Speaking of which, those are some great questions, but it looks like we are running out of time. Did you have any final thoughts, Allison?
The biggest takeaway that I want everyone on the call to walk away with is, again, we have a huge opportunity as an industry to rethink minerals and how we're using them, how we're talking about them, how we're leveraging them, and getting very diligent about what source you're using and understanding what that means for the pet, but also for the performance of your whole product. And I think it's a new wave, right? We're bringing to light what the consumer, I think, maybe doesn't know they need yet, but I do believe we'll be really excited about, because of how foundational these are and how important they are to supporting the health of our animals. And so it's an opportunity. So I look forward to what the future holds, and I just appreciate everyone for making the time to join us today.
Thanks, Allison. And thanks to our audience. I'd like to give a big thank you to our sponsor, Zenpro, for this edition of Ask the Pet Food Pro. Watch for more Ask the Pet Food Pro chats brought to you by Pet Food Industry and Pet Food Forum. I'm Tim Wall, Senior Reporter for Pet Food Industry, and I'd like to say thanks again to Allison and to Zenpro. Also, a big thanks to the Watt Global Media staff for making this possible. Thank you to our international audience for joining us. I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day or evening, depending on which hemisphere is your home. Until next time on Ask the Pet Food Pro, goodbye.